Welcome everybody. This is such a wonderful gathering. I'm so pleased that you were all able to come tonight to the fourth annual awards presentation for the International Mathematical Modelling Challenge that occurred this year in 2018. We have some very special guests to welcome tonight. From the international organisation of IMMC, we have Sol Garfunkel, who is from the COMAP organisation and chairs the International Organising Committee. We have Alfred Chung from the Neo-Union ESC organisation. Those two organisations jointly fund the international competition. I'm also a member of the International Organising Committee. From the Australian International Mathematical Modelling Challenge Committee, our local national committee, we have Michael O'Connor, who is from IMMC. We have Alistair Carr, who is formerly an academic at Gippsland, what's it called? Federation University. And we also had Rodolfo Garcia Flores here, but I don't think Rodolfo's arrived just yet. From ACER, I'd like to welcome Professor Jeff Masters, the CEO of ACER, Ralph Soburn, who is the Director of Professional Resources at, Deputy CEO for Professional Resources at ACER. We have Marissa Ferrari, who has been doing a lot of the organisational work, and we have Alex Harkness doing the videoing and helping us to record the event. Very specially, we have consular representation from Indonesia. We have Mr. Zainal and Ms. Orchida from the Economic Affairs Group at the Indonesian Consul. From the Mathematical Association of Victoria, we have three representatives, Max Stevens, Jim Spithill, who's also an ACER employee and is also an active member of the IMMC judging panel. And we have Tom Moore. So welcome to you three on behalf of the, you could say, the mathematics education community. We have team members and their advisors from Australia, from China, the school in Shanghai, from Indonesia, the school in Bandung, from Taiwan, the team in Taipei, and from the USA, a team in Dobbs Ferry in New York State. We have a number of family and friends of the team members, which is fantastic that that you're able to come. We're very pleased to have that kind of support, and people have come from quite a distance to join us today, particularly the Canberra team, that the people have come from, parents and friends and family from of the team from Radford College in Bruce in the ACT. And I think we also have some media representatives here. Now, if I forgot anybody, I really do apologise. I tried very hard to make sure everybody was included. And I'd like now to just quickly hand over to Jeff Masters, who is going to welcome you here on behalf of ACER. The Australian Council for Education Research is the host organisation for the IMMC in Australia. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Ross. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and team, that includes the team members. On behalf of the Australian Council for Educational Research, the host organisation here in Australia, welcome to this afternoon's very important event. I don't need to tell any of you in this room how important the application of mathematics is in life, in the workplace. Almost every organisation that talks about schooling, that talks about the curriculum, that talks about the importance of planning for the future in education, talks about the importance of not just learning mathematics, but being able to apply mathematics, to think mathematically and to apply mathematics to real life problems. And you know that better than I do. at ACER, we're very focused on assessing and developing students' abilities to apply what they're learning in school in real life context. So we're very happy to be hosting, to welcome you this evening, and trust that you enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Now, we also have, as I said before, I introduced Sol Garfunkel, who is the director of IMMC International. So I'll invite Sol to come to the podium.
On behalf of the IMMC Organizing Committee, it is my extreme pleasure to address you all. First and foremost, we are here to celebrate the inspirational work of the teams assembled here from Shanghai, Taiwan, the US, Indonesia, and of course this year's outstanding team from Australia. Our thanks to Ross and to ACER for hosting this event. We are indeed fortunate to be able to have the outstanding and meritorious, all of them, teams here to present their work. This is an event which reminds us of what can be accomplished with study, teamwork, and perseverance. But as happy as we are to present the IMMC Awards, we need to reaffirm the goal of IMMC is more than rewarding student efforts. COMAP and Neo Union ESC founded IMMC for a larger educational purpose, the promotion of mathematical modeling in schools worldwide. Mathematics is not a sterile subject. We know that new mathematics and new uses of mathematics are being discovered every day. If we're going to have any hope of meeting the global challenges ahead of us, we need students who can analyze the world around them with mathematical modeling. This is our best hope, and we need that hope reflected in school curricula. If we think about why we teach mathematics in essentially every year of student life, it is because it's useful. It's useful in further schooling, it's useful for work, it's useful for daily life, and for itself as a major discipline. Students need to see those uses throughout their education and beyond. Mathematical modeling is a life skill. Work is changing. The career students prepare for may not exist 5 years after they start work. Modeling is the best preparation for the ability to adapt to new situations and remain a productive and employable member of society. We know this. Now, ministries of education, schools, and teachers must all act upon that knowledge. Today, we will see the best of the best. Tomorrow, we must dedicate ourselves to seeing that every student has a chance to solve the important problems of our time through the study and practice of mathematical modeling. We humbly hope that IMMC is making a contribution to that effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sol. Now, we have a wonderful message here.
Hello, I'm Tanya Plibersek, the Shadow Minister for Education and Training and Deputy Leader of the Federal Labor Party. I want to congratulate everyone involved in the International Mathematical Modelling Challenge. I really would have loved to have been at the awards ceremony, but unfortunately I can't be with you tonight. I want to acknowledge the excellent work of ACER to support Australia's participation in the challenge. It is a truly valuable opportunity for Australian students. I also want to congratulate all of the participating school students and teachers. To the students of Radford College and Borkham Hills High School, your selection to represent Australia in the international judging round is absolutely fantastic. To Radford College in particular, being judged the best in the world against very competitive entries is truly a wonderful achievement. You should all be very proud of your work. It's programs like this that give you a taste of how your studies can have a very real impact on the world around you. The task you all worked on was very challenging. I'm sure you will continue to take advantage of the opportunities that test and extend you in further study. I have complete faith that with you as the problem solvers of the future, we'll continue shaping our world into a better place. I also want to especially thank the teachers who advise teams. Thank you so much for inspiring your students to strive to do their very best, both in and out of the classroom. Your work is invaluable and will no doubt ignite your students to do their very best in the remainder of their academic careers. This competition is a great initiative. I look forward to seeing it continue well into the future. Thank you.
So we've actually produced quite a substantial amount of material on our that we've posted on our website, and just recently we have developed that material into a form that can be downloaded as a booklet, as a resource that you can have in your hands. So it's essentially the same material that we have had available for use by anybody who's interested as an online resource, but we've just recently done the work to put it into a form that is more convenient for downloading. And I would like to invite Ralph Soburn to come and officially launch that book. Ralph.
Welcome everyone. My name is Ralph Soburn. I'd like to welcome you here again. And I'd also like again to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. The first Australians have lived in Australia continuously for over 40,000 years. Those of you who are mathematicians listening, everyone here, will start to think about what that really means for human beings to have occupied continuously a place for 40,000 years. We acknowledge their elders, past and present, and we acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, the first Australians, who are contributing to education across this country. Tonight, I'm very pleased to launch this very interesting and rich workbook developed by Professor Peter Galbraith and Professor Derek Holton, neither of whom unfortunately can be here today. Peter and Derek have both been involved in teaching mathematics, in teacher education and the study of mathematics in various forms. Peter has been very deeply involved in mathematical modelling, its learning and teaching for over 30 years, including through his role as an organiser and later president of the International Community of Teachers of Mathematical Modelling and Applications, and more recently as a member of the Australian Management Committee of the IMMC. After 15 years lecturing at the University of Melbourne, Derek took up a chair of pure mathematics at the University of Otago in Dunedin, New Zealand. And in 1985, a position he held until his retirement and return to Melbourne in 2009. He cites his most valuable and personally rewarding activities as the co-founding of the New Zealand Maths website and the establishment of the New Zealand Mathematics Olympiad team. So, the main purpose of the workbook that has been published and is made free from the website for anyone to use, and which Peter and Derek have collaborated on, is to provide teachers with materials that will enable them to prepare students to develop their skills and understandings required for mathematical modelling. In particular, the workbook has been designed to assist teachers, coaching teams in the IMMC, but also for teacher education, preparing teachers to enter the classroom and teach mathematics, and for any teacher of primary and secondary mathematics in schools. The example problems presented in the workbook exemplify the value of teaching and learning mathematical modelling. So students with the problems in this workbook will describe, identify and understand problems. They will specify a real-world situation as a mathematical question, formulate a model, making and justifying assumptions. They'll solve the mathematical problem, interpret the solution, evaluate the model, make adjustments until the model is judged adequate, and then, importantly, report on the success of the model and make suggestions for further work to obtain a better solution. And the workbook helps students and teachers scaffold these elements and support students to develop skills such as identifying assumptions, writing summaries, and full reports. So perhaps my favourite problem in the workbook is one called 1540. Here it is. It is a problem about Wimbledon, and you'll immediately notice the problem with this photograph. Those of you who follow tennis, and we'll be fixing that later, won't we, Ross? For those who don't know, Wimbledon is the last major tennis competition in the world where the players play on grass. Yeah. So in this problem, students are presented with a statement by a tennis commentator who says, a top male player has a 50-50 chance of winning a game from 15-40 on serve. And students are asked to evaluate this statement, given a range of data about what percentage of service points different players win, whether first or second, and how often they land their first serves. First, they must understand and explore what the problem actually is, and then work through ways to transform their questions into mathematical problems. Finally, they need to test and describe their solutions and think further about how they may apply to other contexts. For example, is this one way to evaluate whether Serena Williams is the greatest tennis player of all time, rather than the greatest female tennis player of all time? As someone personally, as a small child who crept out of bed in the middle of the night to watch tennis on the television when it was being played in England on the other side of the world, in the middle of the night for us, in the middle of the day for them, and I used to watch some of those players slugging it out on centre court, and I also used to do the same thing watching the Australian cricket team playing in England in the middle of the night for us, in the middle of the day for them, being beaten again and again by the English cricket team. And I used to be thinking all the time about numbers. How could we win? How could my player win? What would they need to do? What if they won the next game? If they won 3 points? If their service was this low or this high? I can attest to the joys of modelling the permutations and combinations of sporting statistics, particularly in the dark, with the TV turned down so as not to wake your parents. I do believe that much of my own confidence and comfort and interest in mathematics came from those early experiences of playing with numbers and seeing how they related to the real world concerns that I had at the time. So this is a fantastic resource. I commend the authors on their work. I recommend it to all teachers, primary and secondary, to help stimulate their thinking about how to engage learners with mathematics as a real and concrete exercise. And I also commend everyone involved in the IMMC for their great work, and most importantly for making this workbook available for all for free. So well done everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph. So we now come to the most interesting part of the evening, where the 5 teams are going to present themselves and the results of their work to you all. So we'll start with, of course, the Radford College team from Bruce in the Australian Capital Territory. So would you please come forward, and we'll see if I can launch your, well, it's up to you to do it in whichever order you like.
On a planet called Earth, down in the southern hemisphere, in a country called Australia, in a town called Canberra, in a school called Radford. On the 15th to the 19th of March, 4 students tackled the ultimate problem. Over 5 days, they struggled. They fought. They failed. They persevered. But then, finally, they succeeded. Here's the story of how they made it through.
Now, let's introduce you to the team.
Meet Emily Lee, our Editor-in-Chief and spell checker. Emily spends a lot of time playing basketball and hanging out with her friends.
Emily!
Does anyone see
I think she went to basketball. Oh.
Moving on to our next team member, Ryan Stocks, our data analyst and mathematician extraordinaire. Ryan enjoys orienteering and technical theatre, but sometimes tends to work a bit too hard.
Next up is Stone Simmer, our research consultant and producer. In his free time, Stone likes to swim and online shop. While he is good at his job, he sometimes lacks focus.
Finally, there's Brianna Wiseman, the team manager. Brianna's hobbies include singing and equestrian. However, she also has some experience in the field of conflict resolution.
This one.
No, this one.
This one is clearly our one.
That's ridiculous, Stone.
Guys, look!
Oh.
Now that we've met everyone, let's see what they have to say about their experience.
My favourite part of the experience was getting the opportunity to apply my math skills in a new and exciting challenge. Being able to build relationships with all the team members was also a highlight.
I enjoyed the opportunity to apply maths to a real-world situation, and I believe we all gained valuable teamwork skills which will help us in the future. The process of bringing together lots of different skills and ways of thinking was also valuable.
There are 4 pieces of advice that I would give. Firstly, choose your team wisely. Secondly, have a plan and define roles for each team member. Thirdly, don't be afraid to ask the very challenging questions, even though it might cause more conflict or present more problems. And finally, make sure you take care of yourself and get enough sleep.
Finally, on behalf of the Australian team, welcome to Australia and we hope you enjoy your stay.
And gave me breakfast, and she said, do you come from a land down under, where women go and men wonder? Can't you hear the thunder? You better run, you better take cover.
Hi, I'm Stone. I'm Ryan.
I'm Emily.
I'm Brianna.
And we're the Australian team.
The essence of the problem was to determine the best way to choose a hospital. However, there was 2 different requirements that were assessed. The first challenge was to find the best hospital based solely on mortality. However, there were some issues and inaccuracies in this model. So the second and the largest problem was to find the best hospital overall, using any factors that were deemed necessary. The goal of our model was to produce a system that could be used by a patient in order to find the best hospital for their specific needs.
In order to develop our model, there were some basic assumptions that we had to make about our potential patients' priorities and abilities. These were that all, or at the very least sufficient data is easily available to the patient and that it is accurate enough to be of use, that all patients want the best possible care for themselves, that the hospital's highest priority is patient satisfaction and hence costs would ideally be minimised. We assume that all patients are able to travel. However, we also assume that we aim to minimise travel as much as possible. And finally, we assume that patients will choose hospitals based entirely on hospital merit.
One of the simplest measures of a hospital quality is mortality, or the rates of deaths occurring within a hospital, and the Hospital Standardised Mortality Ratio, or HSMR. While on the surface, this may appear to be a decent representation of a hospital's general merits, it does not incorporate other important factors such as patient satisfaction and other complications that may arise from the hospital experience. Furthermore, both HSMR and specific mortality have limitations in their data, especially for small data sets.
Our general model relies on 2 categories of factors, the process and outcome factors. Process refers to anything about the patient's stay in hospital, how comfortable they felt in their time in hospital, how convenient their treatment is for them, and how outcome factors, on the other hand, refer to the results of the treatment, how successful it was, and what was the likelihood that additional complications might have come from the hospital procedures. Depending on certain characteristics of the patient, these groups of factors were weighted differently, which we'll explain later. While the overall groups of process and outcome were weighted differently, so too were the individual factors within each of these groups. This is based on what we deem to be their importance and level of accuracy, and also based on the amount of variation within each factor. The process score was calculated simply using a weighted average with fixed weightings. However, the outcome score was calculated using a weighted average, while the weightings were based on how frequently the corresponding factor has occurred.
Our four main process factors were patient score. This was a survey-based result, where patients were asked about their overall satisfaction with their treatment. Waiting times. This referred to the median number of days before treatment was usually delivered. It is specific to the kind of treatment required. Finally, cost of treatment and travel times.
Our outcome section was split into 5 main factors. First of all, specific mortality. This refers to the mortality rate at each hospital specific to the patient's condition. Secondly, HSMR, which stands for the Hospital Standardised Mortality Ratio, which is the ratio of observed deaths to expected deaths, considering factors such as patient age and diagnosis. Serious complications. This refers to the likelihood that a patient will develop any kind of serious side effect from their treatment. Infection rate, which is the percentage of patients who develop an infection while in hospital. And finally, readmission rate, which is the proportion of patients who, after being discharged, are readmitted to hospital for issues related to their original condition. While there are other factors which could also be relevant in choosing the best hospital, such as doctor recommendation and cultural or religious factors, we were unable to include these factors as they were qualitative rather than quantitative.
The data we collected was in a variety of formats, for percentages, ratios, and the like. So we needed a way to present the data in a comparable format. To achieve this, we normalized the data, as normalization provides a score between 0 and 100, 0 being the worst piece of data and 100 being the ideal hospital. This is a much more readable format for an end user, as it is a clear ranking of the hospitals and how they compare against each other.
The weighting for each of our process factors were decided based on their relative importance to a patient. Patient score incorporates all elements of the process and thus was weighted the highest at 45%. However, it cannot be the sole determining factor as it does not consider a patient's specific needs for a certain diagnosis. 3 separate specific factors are chosen to be incorporated as well. The first was waiting times. The weighting for waiting times was chosen to be 25%, as patients are generally willing to wait longer for better treatment. However, but time till matters, however, as a patient's health may deteriorate as they wait longer. The second was cost of treatment. The majority of patients will not sacrifice the quality of treatment for the price, and cost does not directly affect a patient's well-being, so it was only weighed at 15%. The final factor was travelling time. Since the model requires patients to already have enough time to research a hospital, it assumes that the illness is not very urgent, hence travel time is only weighted at 15% as well.
The weightings for the outcome factors were determined based on how frequently the corresponding factors occurred. Prior to this adjustment, the weightings for the individual factors were HSMR 25%, specific mortality 25%, serious complications 20%, infection rate 15%, and readmission rates 15%. The weighted average was then taken to determine the overall outcome score for the hospital.
The weighting of outcome and process was determined based on the proportion of the patient's life remaining to be spent in the hospital. This was determined by the average time a patient is required to spend in hospital given a certain disease, divided by the average life expectancy of the patient given that disease. If a patient is going to only spend a small proportion of the rest of their life in hospital, then clearly the outcome of the treatment is more important than the process. Whereas if the patient is going to spend most of the rest of their life in hospital, then the process is more important than the outcome.
We chose to test our model on American hospitals, as the required data had already been made available. Our model was tested on several scenarios to demonstrate the individualization of our rankings. For example, for a young child with a broken ankle, Mayo Clinic was found to be the best hospital in the US, as it had the best outcome score. This is consistent with the US News rankings, which also ranked Mayo Clinic as the best hospital in the US. For a terminally ill patient, however, Big Fort Valley Hospital was found to be the best hospital, as it has high patient satisfaction, and although the outcome factors were not as good, this is less important for a terminally ill patient.
The strength of our model is the ability to give a standardized score to a hospital, considering a patient's individual needs. This makes our model better than existing models, which don't consider a specific patient. It works well when there is sufficient data available. However, finding the data can be challenging for many hospitals. Our model also doesn't take into account specific surgeons or other qualitative factors, so the model will need to be used in conjunction with the patient's other information and recommendations from their own doctors.
Further work is needed to ensure the required data is available to patients and to provide more specific data for various categories. The model could also be more specialised to a patient by giving them more options to determine the most important and which category they find most important. More data would also allow the patient to decide between more specific factors such as facilities and cleanliness, which would make a patient's experience more pleasant.
And finally, thanks again to the IMMC committee and ASA for making this event possible, and Kim Pauferman, our team advisor, for all of your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
The second team is the team from the Shanghai Experimental School in China.
Shanghai Experimental School Mathematical Modeling Center. Since the founding of Shanghai Experimental School, or SES, 30 years ago, it has adhered to comprehensive education reform and creative talent training. In 2010, student-tailored curriculum was launched to provide participants with individualized learning platform. Then was the birth of mathematical modeling activity on SES campus in 2011, supporting the needs of a group of math lovers. In mathematical modeling, researchers use mathematical concepts and language to describe the essential attributes and internal laws of objects and systems, analyze the phenomena in daily life by constructing mathematical models, and thus predict some changes and results. Each participant must be equipped with sufficient knowledge reserve, excellent innovative ability, and a good team spirit. SES Mathematical Modeling Club began as a group of enthusiasts exploring knowledge and struggling to complete their contest papers in a primitive spare classroom. But they did become the outstanding winner of high school mathematical contest in modeling at one stroke. Since then, to improve the students' activity environment and to offer them more support, the school attached great importance to the establishment of the Mathematical Modeling Center, which was designed by 3 students from the club. It was completed in 2015 with a total area of about 400 square meters, enjoying both a delicate artistic design feeling and a tension of logic and rationality. In terms of its hardware facilities, the center has 15 high-performance servers and 10 other types of computers. Every year, students in our school are active participants in international contests like the International Mathematical Modeling Challenge. In competitions ranging from 36 to 120 hours in duration, they continuously discuss and amend their solution to the provided problem. It is due to their scientific division of work and harmonious cooperation that they are able to overcome difficulty and fatigue, and finally finish their paper on time at a high level of quality. After the competition season, the teams rethink the problems and solutions routinely before they concentrate on problems in real life, such as course scheduling systems suitable for class selection and traffic congestion along elevated road in Shanghai. Through a variety of activities, our team has grown into an elite team of over 40 people across 4 grades. Up to now, SES Mathematical Modeling Team has been designated as outstanding twice in international high school students events, including the IMMC, meritorious winners for 6 times in international university students contests, awarded research fund of 20,000 yuan from Shanghai Science Education Development Foundation twice, and has won more than 30 other prizes. Such brilliant achievement benefits from President Su Hong's educational philosophy to encourage students' extracurricular specialties and condone their weaknesses, providing a free environment for students, and also cannot be done without the advisor team's wholehearted guide and help. Thanks to their devotion, today, Shanghai Experimental School Mathematical Modeling Center has become a broad platform for students to get involved in STEM integrated innovation, interact with cutting-edge science and technology, cultivate scientific research spirit, and develop creative capacity. Let's embrace its brighter future.
But this is also a really important message that at some point, systems have to take this seriously, have to change the way they are structured and organised and the way they target the goals of connecting mathematics with the ways in which it can be used. Could the Chinese team come forward?
Distinguished professors, guests, and friends, we are a team from Shanghai Experimental School. In the competition, we construct a mathematical model on how to choose the best hospital. In today's presentation, we are going to elaborate on our thoughts and point out some improvements and extensions of our model. According to the background information, we do the restatement of the problem. The problem can be divided into two parts. First, using evitable mortality rate to assess a hospital's quality. The second is to add more factors that may influence the hospital's quality. So we use logistic regression to gain the expected status of a patient. However, it requires a lot of medical records that are not accessible for patients. They are just used for in hospital. So we introduced the hospital levels for patients to get the quality of a hospital. In Model B, we consider not only from the hospital's view, but also from the patient's view. The factors that listed in the PowerPoint are pointed out by different colors, and they are related to each other. So we are facing with a decision-making problem. And finally, we get a hospital ranking program. The patients just need to enter his or her information, and he or she can get his or her best hospital. Our general assumptions are as follows. The first, high-level hospitals accept patients with more severe diseases. The definition of evitable death is the death that can be avoided under average medical standard. The best hospital is defined as the hospital that provides the optimal treatment a person can receive under his or her conditions and intentions. The ability of a normal hospital is average in every specialty. Social insurance and medical insurance of the society is improved.
Before proposing our first model, we studied the reality of the problem. It is apparent that we cannot use the mortality of a disease in a particular hospital and the average the difference between the mortality of the disease in a hospital and the average mortality of the disease to calculate the evitable mortality of a hospital, because each patient has his or her unique circumstances, which is a factor to determine the possibility of death. What's more, situations often vary among hospitals. The better hospitals often treat with more serious cases, while other hospitals often treat with relatively ordinary cases. So the relationship between mortality and hospital quality can be shown on the slide. Based on these observations, we proceed to build Model A. Submodel 1 is based on the hypothesis that abundant medical data is available. We hold the view that a patient's expected status, that is, life or death, is related to his or her age, sex, length of stay, comorbidity, and emergency degree. And we find it through logistic regression. Logistic regression is a classification model that outputs two possible results, 0 or 1. Through comparing the expected status and the actual status of a patient, we can calculate how many patients were meant to live but died in the hospital, and thus the evitable mortality of a hospital can be acquired. Well, this is how logistic regression works, and this is an algorithm called gradient descent, which is used to optimize the model. We are faced with this goal, and we use this algorithm to find the value of a function. Well, this is the thing we're gonna minimize. And this is the process. However, under most circumstances, the medical records of a patient are not available to the public, so it is necessary to develop a less data-dependent model for ordinary patients. In submodel 2, we introduced the hospital classification mechanism, which divides hospitals into different levels according to the seriousness of the disease, the cases they treat. According to our assumption that a hospital does almost equally well in each scope of medicine it offers, we can approximately calculate the mortality of a disease in a certain hospital. And because we know the amount of disease of the amount of hospitals in a level and the aggregate death rate of a disease, we can calculate the expected mortality of level, and we can calculate the evitable mortality by subtracting it from the actual mortality of a hospital. Because the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services rank the hospitals into 5 levels, we use these to apply our model in the state of New York, and this is our result, and it's shown on the slide.
Model B add more factors about the hospital and person. So we think that there are 2 ways to define a hospital, the characteristics and the outcome. So we choose the latter approach. We consider the inevitable mortality rate, the adjusted recovery rate, medical costs, and the satisfaction of patients. We also consider more factors such as the emergency of a patient, the position of the hospital and the patient, and his or her desire to travel long for better treatment. And we build 4 scoring functions that reflects a hospital's mortality, recovery, accessibility, and affordability, just showing our PowerPoint. Now we are facing with a multi-objection ranking system. So we use 3 different methods to determine the weights. The first is the multiplication method, and the second is the lambda method. These 2 methods are simple and easy to understand, but they cannot determine the difference of weights. So we employ the AHP method. In the problem, the objective is to choose the best hospital, and the criteria are the 4 scoring functions we made before, and the measures are all the hospitals we consider. These are the rules of our AHP method. And these are the CI and CR rates of our AHP method. The finally ranking function is shown in our PowerPoint. We choose Manhattan to test our model due to its sufficient data, and the hospitals and their represent color are shown as follows. We chose 3 scenarios that are common in Manhattan to find as examples. The first one, the patient has no emergency of average wealth and no desire to travel long distance, while the second one, the patient is emergency, and the third one, the patient is wealthy and want to travel for long distance. These are all 18-1 results of our model. You can find the 3 methods agree with each other.
As for our model's further extension, since our model aims to truly help patients choose the best hospital and help them get to the hospital as fast as possible, we think that nothing above shall be shown to the patients since they won't accept hard math calculations. And that's why we made this UI to help patients choose the best hospital. It is quite, well, at least I think it is quite user-friendly. And this is the testing video. The database includes American hospitals only currently. And suppose the patient is now in Blizzard Entertainment. He's not quite willing to travel and not quite urgent, but we need to pay. And that's where he should go. And the next one, we suppose the patient is now in White House. And he cares more about mortality because he doesn't want to die. And that's where he should go. And this is basically what we did in the contest and after. We're currently working to put it online.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was amazing. I think it's really, just after having the first two, there are a couple of things I noticed. First of all, there are some similarities in the way the two teams have approached the problem, identifying some similar variables, but they've gone about doing this work in completely different ways. It's a really important reminder that in mathematics, unlike what we were told when we were at school, and unlike the way many students are led to expect, that is, there isn't usually a single correct answer to an important mathematical problem. There are important processes that one has to go through in order to come up with a reasonable answer in response to the assumptions that one chooses to make. So I'm really happy to see that work. So can I now introduce the team from Bandung in Indonesia?
All it takes is one flight. We'd be in the same time zone. Looking through your timeline, seeing all the rainbows. I got an idea, and I know that it sounds crazy. I just wanna see you. Oh, I gotta ask, do you got plans tonight? I'm a couple 100 miles from Japan, and I was thinking I could fly to your hotel tonight. 'Cause I can't get you off my mind. Can't get you off my mind. Can't get you off my mind. I could feel the tension. We could cut it with a knife. I know it's more than just a friendship. I can hear you thinking right, yeah. Do I gotta convince you that you shouldn't fall asleep? It'll only be a couple hours, and I'm about to leave. Do you got plans tonight? I'm a couple 100 miles from Japan, and I was thinking I could fly to your hotel tonight. 'Cause I can't get you off my mind. Can't get you off my mind. Can't get you off my mind. Do you got plans tonight? I was hoping I could get lost in your paradise. The only thing I'm thinking about is you and I. 'Cause I can't get you off my mind. Can't get you off my mind. I can't seem to get you off my mind. Let's get lost tonight. Let's get lost tonight.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alvin Solongbudi. This is Chandra. That's Ken, and that's Andrew Wijaya. And we're here with our advisor, Mr. Victor, right there. And we're Team Half Ice from Indonesia. So the problem is that in a non-emergency situation, choosing the best hospital in an area can be very complicated. And so why does this problem need to be fixed? So first of all,
is that, of course, everyone wants the best healthcare from themselves or those around them. And then next is that we want to prevent unnecessary hospital readmissions. And then we want to, of course, minimize the overall mortality rate. And then lastly, to avoid overpaying. So the goal of our model is to create a mathematical model to determine the best hospital in the area. And how we solve it is we created two models with different factors. The first one is only using the mortality rate as the sole factor. And then the second one is we use a lot of factors, which we call the various variable model.
All right, so the first one we'll be talking about the mortality rate model. And for this model, we do not solely take into account the percentage of mortality from a hospital, but we do take two other factors to be paid attention. The first one is the fatality rate of its diseases, because we know that not all of the diseases are curable, or the curability of its diseases is different. And then the second one is we take into account the total number, the exact number of patients who is being treated in the hospital. Because a sole percentage of mortality is does not reflect the number of the patients, right? So if you take into account the total number of patients, you get the more holistic result. And then next, this is the mathematical formulations for our first model. As you can see from the equations, the first part of it shows in the first part we compare the average mortality rate of the disease all of the hospitals, and we compare it to the particular mortality rate of a hospital. And then in the later part, we take into account the effects of the total number of patients. And then this is the result from the first model. In general, when we see the result, we notice that there is no clear okay, let's see. In the right side, this is the rank resulting from our model, which is the mortality rate model. And then from the right, that is the government provided rank for the hospitals in New Jersey, in USA. And if you see in general the names of the hospital, most of them are different in ranks, or even like you cannot see in the other part kind of like that. So we decided that the first model have quite some flaws, and therefore there are weaknesses, which is the first one is that we do not the model do not take into account the complications that may occur when the patients are receiving treatment from the hospital. And then the second one is that the model do not also take into account the specialty of a hospital. Let's say, for example, there's a hospital that focuses on heart surgery or focuses on eye diseases, kind of like that. It's very valuable, right? If you have heart disease, then you go to the heart disease hospital. But in this case, you just see the hospital just like the general mortality rate, kind of like that. And then the third one is that about data error. So we noticed from the result that there are lots of sources of data that are incomplete or inviolable. So when we use that data, some hospitals might jump from like the bottom rank to the top rank or otherwise. So we are not ensured that the hospital is really the best hospital or not. Therefore, we decided to go into the next model, which is the various variable model. Now, in this model, we take into account seven variables. The first one is the mortality rate, same as before. The second and the third one is focusing more on the interactions between the patient and the hospital. The fourth and the fifth one is about the complications that might happen during the treatment. And then the sixth and the seventh one is actually a more minor factor here, which is the sophistications of the hospitals and, of course, the cost. Now, as we have 7 factors to be included in our calculations, we decided that we need some weighting method to decide the importance of each factors. And we know that it might be very subjective to every person, whether you want to calculate the cost first or you want to calculate the healthcare first. So we try to weight the factors based on personal views. And this is, as you can see, the result of the weighting method, starting from the most important, which is the care process, and then the next one is the mortality rate, and so on and so forth. Now, for the next model, we tested with the same data as before, which is the hospital data from New Jersey. And we tune our model to be able to calculate the best hospital by using only the data provided from the New Jersey. Therefore, we only use 3 factors, which is the care process, mortality rate, and patient safety. Now, the first one is, this is the mathematical formulation. The first one is the care process. Right here, basically, we compare each hospital's percentage of mortality to the average of the whole hospital in New Jersey. And then the next one is the mortality rate. This one is pretty much the same with the previous model. But as you can see, there's a quarter factor there, which is resulted from the number of diseases, the number of mortality rate, the number of diseases that has a mortality rate factors in New Jersey. So we have 4 diseases, therefore we multiply each of them into quarter and then add them up. And then the next one is the patient safety. This one we also compare each hospital's patient safety parameter to the overall. So right here you can see there's a patient safety frequency. So it's like the data shows us how many times there's an unwanted incident happens during a treatment on the hospital. So yes, we try to compare that. And of course, we wanted to combine all 3 of them. So we multiply its index, each factor's index with their weight multiplier, and then add the 3 of them. And therefore, we obtain the final result for our various variable method.
And so to explain a little bit more about the results we got here, firstly, we want to compare both of these. So the first one is the Hackensack Hospital. As you can see on the R model, it's on the 2nd rank, and then under government provided rank, it's on the 1st place. And then for the Atlantic Care, it has the same rank on both our model and the government provided one. And then just to ensure, the Englewood Hospital is on the 18th rank, and when the government provided rank is in the 12th position. And also we want to emphasize in that in the government provided rank, it weights more on the achievements on the complex diseases resolved, and whereas in our model we weighted it more to the care process, which means it has more to the process than any other achievements. And so the purpose of this comparison is just to see that the hospitals that should be on the top ranks stays on the top ranks on our models, and that the hospitals that are on lower ranks stays on lower ranks. And of course, there are strengths from our model. The first one is that our model emphasizes more on the overall healthcare process. And then secondly is that it has consideration towards the each hospital's ability for a specific task. So for example, if a hospital has a specialization in a certain disease, if it brings negative points or data with it, so it is not punished as much as the general hospital. And thirdly is that it has a capability of constant adaptation to the data changes that may occur to the hospital. Also, for example, if a hospital has a better performance or a worse performance, it will directly lead to the ranks getting higher or lower. And then lastly is that it also has consideration towards the economic strength of the patients. So the weaknesses are, firstly, is that our model relies heavily on the data, availability of the data, which means it does not work where the data is incomplete, or if there's a place with only half the data that requires. And secondly is that the condition of the outpatients after treatment aren't calculated in. So for example, if a patient may result in death after the treatment, it is not calculated in the mortality rate. And lastly is that it does not rank the real-time hospital quality because the data only changes periodically, which is in month time or a year time. So in conclusion is that the hospital's quality and performance are affected by a lot of factors, and by weighting these factors according to their significance, we can rank the hospitals based on the overall performance. So thank you for your attention. We're half eyes from Indonesia.
We now have another pattern to observe, and that is that of all the things that we might say about the United States of America at the moment, they provide data, public data. Isn't it fantastic? Yeah, I think it's amazing. So we now have the team from the Taipei Municipal Zhongshan Girls High School in Taiwan, who achieved also the Meritorious Award, Achievement Award. So can we have that, the Taiwan team, please? Want the video or the video first?
说再见，先解脱。世界在他背后，原来这么的辽阔。越坚强，越温柔，也揉进我的拳头去抢走，顺性生活的节奏。但是谁说女孩没有 rock and roll？ 我对我说，当最后只剩下我，谁是我英雄？看不到，找不到，等不到你的 hero。 为何不做自己，只手成天的时候？你可以，我可以，为自己赴汤蹈火的时候，小女王挥舞着骄傲披风。在我的编年史中写下了一个小说，要把 history 改写成 her story。在我的回忆录中，快乐要蔓延很久。 让这今天开始建造我王国，我是女王一般的虚荣，看不到，找不到，等不到你的 hero， 为何不做自己，只手成天的虚荣？你可以，我可以，为自己赴汤蹈火，不再退缩。 不要了，不找了，不等了，谁要 hero？ 站出来，做自己，只手成天的虚荣。你可以，我可以，为自己赴汤蹈火的虚荣。小女王挥舞着骄傲披风。
ladies and gentlemen, we're from Taipei Municipal Zhongshan Girls High School.
Yes. 这个段你自己按的。
This is the introduction. And the setting. We adapt data from Taiwan. We considered objective factors and personal preferences. I divided our report into 3 parts. First, we defined the mortality rate. Second, we took another 4 factors into consideration. Then we can establish our model from 5 different factors. At last, we will have case simulation to make it clear.
Question 1. Develop a model that uses mortality to measure the quality of a hospital. We take advantage of these 3 data to infer and expect the total mortality rate after medical treatment. Because their mortality can be totally different due to a lot of variance, we calculate all the data for the 2 genders respectively, and we simply list 3 factors on the PowerPoint. This is a demonstration of our calculation. F is female, M is male. We try to find the death toll after medical treatment, but those data are confidential in Taiwan. So we estimated, and that's what you can see on these 2 pages. We just divided the number of patients of emergency and outpatient clinic by the death toll after medical treatment, and we can get total mortality rate after medical treatment. We take the data of 2016 for example. In this chart, E equals to P times R, so it's clear to see how we infer M, the total mortality rate after medical treatment. After our calculation, after our calculation, we can get M for the 2 genders. We consider M for the 2 gender normal distribution. We divide the result into 6 intervals and set the mortality score. This is females. This is males. We conclude them in this chart.
The second question is about measuring the quality of hospitals based on more factors. We found information about the reason why people choose hospitals. Then we chose 4 of these factors, which is more objective to create our model. The first one is the doctor score. We found information about top doctors from Business Week magazine. We calculate the number of each division of top doctors in each division of every hospital and standardize them as X, and transform X to a distribution from 1 to 6.99 by linear function to get Y. Use integer functions to get the final doctor score. Take cardiology of Hospital 1 for example. Use the wave above. It can get 2 points, and 2 is the doctor score of cardiology of Hospital 1. The next one is the hospital score. We measure the size and resources of hospitals by the number of beds. Referring to the information of hospital evaluation, we divide it into 6 intervals. The third one is the recommendation score. We divide it into 2 parts. If the patient received recommendation, it can get 1 point. If not, get 0. The last one is the traffic score. It is measured by the driving time to the hospital. Less driving time implies higher traffic score. And last, add the mortality score from question 1, then we can get the final score of each hospital.
To get the final score, we need to assign the weight number for each factor. And to do that, we create a questionnaire for patients to survey how important is each factor. Each row represents a factor we considered, which we just mentioned in the previous part. And each column represents a level of importance. And we use 0 and 1 to stand for whether the patient checked or not. In this example, the patient quite care about the equipment and care a lot about doctor's expertise. And this is our factor importance matrix. We calculate the factor importance score by multiplying the score each level represents. The sum of each row is 1, because patients should choose only one option in each row. And this is an example of the factor importance score after we calculated. Then we can get the proportion of each factor, and the sum of the proportion is 1. After we get the proportion of each factor, we are able to calculate the final score for each hospital. And each row represents a hospital, and each column represents the score of different factors in each hospital. Because the score AI3 is different from the others, so we use a relation matrix to transform all the score into the same level, and after that, we can get the final score.
So now let's go on our case simulation. Sorry. This is Mr. Hello, and he has heart disease. He wants to go to see the cardiologist, but how can he find hospitals which fit him? So we will give him our user-friendly memo. Okay, but how can he use it? Step 1, he has to write down his name and his gender, the division he wants to go, the address, and check the form whether he has received the recommendation. The most important part is filled in the form. We have 5 factors and 5 scores on our form. And with 1, I still not mind at all, and with 5, I still a lot. The higher the score is, the greater the degree is. And each row is required. So after he finished the form, then he just click the enter and send our information, then he can get our advice. We perhaps give him 3 to 5 hospitals for reference. And the advantage of our memo is that it's easy, handy, and convenient. It's also variable. In the future, if we have chance to get more data, we can expand our model or give more precise results to our users. This is the calculation behind our model.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Now for our final team from Dobbs Ferry School in New York State in USA, the Master School in Dobbs Ferry, sorry. Henry, Miranda, Noah, and Noah, please come.
Hello, I'm Henry. This is Miranda, Noah, and Noah. If you get them confused, we do too. And we want to talk about our approach as Team USA to this problem, which we called Health Search, a desktop app for ranking hospitals.
So one of the things that we first did when we came together to do this model was figure out what the problem is actually asking us to do. And immediately we get together, analyze the problem, and then split up and do research and figure out how it is that we're going to conquer this problem. And one of the first things that we had to figure out in doing this was what is inevitable death, right? What does that actually mean? You know, it sort of seems simple, but might not necessarily be. And after doing a lot of research, we used that to calculate HSMRs, which Noah can tell you more about.
Really quickly, sorry. Just as a last thing, what we try to do with our modeling is to take an approach like the way that professionals do, right? So looking at the existing solutions to the problem in the world and to try to make it so that we have a solution which does things better than what you could already find out in the world.
Right. So for our first attempt at ranking hospitals, we first ranked hospitals based on HSMRs, or hospital standardized mortality rates, which is given by this equation, which is essentially the actual number of deaths at a given hospital over the predicted number of deaths at a given hospital. So the question that raises is, how do you calculate the predicted deaths? We did that using a logistic regression, which is essentially a computer learning algorithm which tries to find connections between given input variables and a binary output variable, in this case, whether a patient lives or dies. We built our regression using data from the New York State Sparks program, which was the most robust data set we could find, and we used a total of 7 variables, including age group, gender, and race, etc. Now, the problem we ran into was that the data we've had was extremely imbalanced, meaning very few people actually died. What that meant for our which was a bad thing in our case. What that meant was what our regression would do was it basically guessed that everyone would survive, which is extremely accurate. It was almost 99% accurate, but it's basically useless if you want to get different estimations for different hospitals. So what we had to do was we had to use an oversampling method to first create synthetic minority data, and then an undersampling method to essentially clean out noise and outliers created by the oversampling. And then we used an imbalanced weighting scheme which penalized the model or penalized the regression more for incorrect answers. After all this work, we decided that the HSMR model was not good enough because, for one, it didn't take into account whether a death was evitable or not. It didn't take into account disease severity or other information related to hospital quality. And also, even after the oversampling and undersampling, the model was not all that great at actually predicting whether someone died or not. So we decided to move on to a different model.
So like all the previous groups, we had a wealth of data at our hands that we had to use and quantify to create a quantitative value for hospital quality, and we chose these weights for various variables and groups.
Right, so the problem that we ran into is that there's actually too much data when it comes to modeling these problems. It's really difficult to figure out how exactly each different factor, when you look at something like mortality rates, for example, where mortality can be caused by so many different things, it's hard to say what the actual underlying mortality rates are. So the way the data is reported, and particularly in the United States by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, includes lots of different subdivisions and measures of data, which each individually are not that useful, and it's extremely difficult to piece out by hand how much each of those affects something like hospital quality. So given that problem that we have 47 different metrics in 7 categories with an unclear relationship to hospital quality as a concept, our solution was to use a computational probability technique called latent variable modeling to infer how much each metric is affected by a hidden latent variable of hospital quality. So what that means is you can imagine that you have different measures of patient satisfaction or mortality that are all in these measured groups, one of these 7 groups. Now, if the hospital is worse in that area, is worse for mortality, then all of those mortality measures are likely to be worse, which means they vary together, that they correlate together. And what you can do with probability is to fit all those different distributions to your expected probabilities and try to see how much all those metrics move as a group between hospitals, which allows you to access an underlying score, which tells you, at least in theory, the quality and the amount that that hospital in particular has an effect on the data that you observe. basically trying to see the hidden variable of quality based off of the observed metrics that you can see in the data.
So, like the Shiros from Taiwan, we wanted to create a questionnaire that would allow our model to be personalized to the user. So what we have here is 7 questions, 3 of which pertain to the experience of a patient, 3 of which pertaining to the structure and effectiveness of a hospital, and 1 pertaining to the severity of symptoms. And what the user does is, on a scale of 1 to 5, they answer how important these things are to them. And then what we do in these equations that you see is we average them. We average the 3 ratings per group, and we redistribute the weights along a linear distribution, and that's what this large equation is on the bottom, so that we have more accurate weights that are more tailored to what the user needs. And this is an example of what our model outputs. First, you put in your address, and then you answer the 7-question questionnaire, and then what it does is it outputs 5 or however many hospitals ranked in order of their quality score based on our model.
So another problem that you run into attempting to use data in the real world is 1, that a lot of it is missing, and 2, that it's in all sorts of different formats. So for example, with mortality, unless you're Noah Crooks, lower is better. But for some other factors like patient satisfaction, higher is better. And they're also reported in all different ways. So mortality rates are percentages, but patient satisfaction is a score out of 10, or in some surveys it's a score out of 8. And all those different scales make it really difficult to compare them on a one-to-one basis. So what we did is a process called mean standardization, where we convert all of these values to something called z-scores, which measure the number of standard deviations above or below the average value for that given metric the value observed at a hospital is. So it basically turns everything into a -1 to 1 scale that will allow you to compare disparate types of data that don't at all look the same, and then allows you to fit the computational latent variable model to data that otherwise has absolutely no resemblance to each other. So this is the final metric that we reach and use in ranking our model. What we do is we take the latent variable for each model, which you can see as alpha there in this equation, and then we multiply it by the weight, and then sum over all those weights and divide by the total amount through all those weights. And then finally, we try to form a distribution where all the scores will be in a user-friendly format between 0 and 10, with the average score falling at 5. And generally, it fits a normal distribution, meaning that they all, that really good and really bad hospitals are quite rare, and just about average hospitals are what's normal.
So this is an example of 2 different aspects of our model. The first is the top 5 hospitals in the closest proximity, and as you can see, we have different cases. One using the weights that our model provides initially. The second, the prioritized S&E score, is for a patient who cares a lot about the structure and patient experience of a hospital. And the prioritized Q score is the severity of symptoms. So these scores really allow you to weigh your options and see, what hospital is best for you. And then in the second table here, what we've done is we've expanded our parameters to include all hospitals within 60 miles. So you're not selling yourself short. If you want a hospital with better quality that's a little farther away, you have that option, and you can compare more with this aspect of the model.
So after completing our model, and in part because we had sunk so much time into it, we felt that it was also a good idea to look at how a model like this could be expanded for use outside of just one individual making one decision. So for example, we look at some of the highest rated hospitals in our system, Park Place Surgical Hospital, the Mayo Clinic, and New England Baptist, and compare those to their overall status as considered sort of some of the national best hospitals in the United States as part of a way of testing the validity of the model, and whether you could then use a model like this to rank hospitals nationally rather than just in a local area. And then what we do in the second figure here is we take the average score of different healthcare providers in each state, which then we show in a lithograph here, which allows you to see what the general quality is in all these areas. And some of the conclusions from this is that hospital quality is usually higher in richer areas on the coasts and poor in
poor areas and in the south. And ideally, models like this, especially when applied to smaller regional areas, could let you see how different test cases in sociology might have different access to healthcare. Ideally meaning that a model like this could have uses outside of just an individual making decisions. And finally, like we were saying at the beginning in our methodology, what we try to do is look at every different approach we could find out there, which in this case are these 4 ranking systems from Medicare, US News and World Report's Health Insight, and Leapfrog Group. And then we tried to figure out what the strengths and weaknesses of all of them were. So we saw that obviously more measures was better, that patient opinion survey data was critically important, and that missing data for individual measures, which in a lot of cases is just taken out, which means hospitals that underreport are not considered at all. We looked at systems that would impute that data, allowing you to compare hospitals, even those that don't have quite as much data as others. And then all these other factors, and our system there, Health Search, at least in our ranking with the factors that we pick, manages to beat these ones out. So we consider the strengths of our model to be the latent variable modeling that we use to access hospital quality, the weights being derived from authoritative sources and from the lots of holistic measures that we see in the data that we're using, that we modify the weight metric based on user input, and that we replace unknown measure data with national means when comparing hospitals, and also that our model avoids expert bias, which is a criticism of some other models that focus too much on either top surgeons or the rankings of those top surgeons, which introduces expert bias. And our weaknesses being that our model is probabilistic, meaning that the scores we obsess are not objective, they're just likely to be correct. That symptom severity is not directly correlated to outcomes. So just because a person feels bad when they go to the hospital doesn't necessarily mean that they're at more risk. That our weights obviously can never be 100% accurate, that we have a limited amount of information from the user, and that there's a lot of missing data all over the country no matter what source you use. So these are some of our references. And finally, we wanted to talk about our experience with math modeling. So between the 4 of us, we've done 12 of these competitions across 4 years. And these competitions have influenced our interest in going into math, physics, biology, and computer science. That the experience is a lot different from anything we've ever had in a class, and that we sort of have become lifelong friends through these, and we sort of push each other to do better. And what I wanted to also say is that the experience of coming here and being able to come here, especially because my family is from Australia, to be able to be here, and we're here for 2 weeks actually, to try to sightsee a little, has been one of the best experiences of my life, and that I really, really appreciate what this competition has done. So, thank you.
The end of the ceremony tonight is perhaps the most important thing that we're going to do, and that is to actually hand out certificates.